The ancient dragon named Baekho lay on top of a tall crystal mountain. His once bright red scales had turned dull like old copper coins. Each breath made small rocks fall down the mountain sides. He was very old and very tired. For 3,000 years, Baekho had protected this part of the galaxy. He had watched over trade ships that carried goods between different worlds. When alien races fought with each other, he helped them make peace. The bird people called Veltari used to bring him shiny stones as gifts. The rock people called Korthak would talk with him for many years about deep thoughts and ideas. But now everything was different. The young races had forgotten about him. They did not need an old dragon anymore. They had new machines and computers to help them. They could talk to each other across the stars without his help. Spaceships could protect themselves with strong shields and fast weapons. Baekho closed his big yellow eyes. His bones hurt all the time now. Soon he would die and become dust like all living things do. This thought did not scare him, but it made him feel very lonely. No one would remember him when he was gone. The sound of a small spaceship came through the thin air. Baekho barely lifted his heavy head. Maybe someone had come to see if the old dragon was dead yet. Maybe they wanted his scales or the bright gems in his cave. He was too tired to care anymore. The ship landed softly on a narrow ledge below where he rested. A very small person got out and started climbing up the rocky path. As she came closer, Baekho saw she was human. Humans were the newest race to join the galaxy community. Her black hair was tied back and she wore simple clothes for space travel. The young woman was not afraid like most beings were when they saw him. She looked right into his old eyes with real interest, not fear or wonder. "Honored Baekho," she said with a respectful bow. "My name is Sojin. I have traveled very far to meet you." "Child," his voice sounded like faraway thunder. Each word was hard to say because he was so weak. "Why do you look for a dying old thing? The galaxy does not need dragons anymore." Sojin sat down on a smooth rock near his great head. She did not seem bothered by the heat that still came from his scales. "Maybe the galaxy does not need you, but I do. I heard you were the keeper of stories. I have a story I think you might like to hear." Baekho made his eyes smaller. In all his long life, no one had ever wanted to tell him a story. He was always the one who shared wisdom and told about old times and forgotten heroes. This was something new, and it made something stir in his chest that he thought had died long ago. "Very well, small storyteller," he said. He put his big head down on the stone near her. "I will listen." Sojin smiled and started to speak. Her voice was clear and strong even though she was small. It carried easily through the thin mountain air. She told him about Earth, the blue and green world where humans came from. She talked about its big oceans and many different lands. She described the countless animals and plants that had lived there with her people. But this was not the clean version of human history that was in galactic computer files. Sojin told him about humanity's hard times, their wars and mistakes, their ability to be both cruel and very kind. She spoke of human poets who died in battles while writing poems about beautiful things they would never see again. She told him of scientists who gave their lives to save others from sickness and disasters. "We are not the strongest race in the galaxy," Sojin said. Her eyes looked up at the stars above them. "We are not the smartest or the most advanced. But we have something that I think you might understand, Ancient One. We can carry forward the stories of those who came before us." Baekho listened with growing interest as she went on. She told him about human ways of remembering their ancestors. They did not just build stone monuments or metal statues. They kept their ancestors alive through memory. Human children learned the names and deeds of grandparents they never met. They kept their spirits alive by remembering them. The first moon of this world rose over the mountain peaks. It painted everything in silver light. For the first time in many years, Baekho was not thinking about death. The human's words had woken something inside him. It was the same curiosity that had driven him through his long life. When Sojin stopped talking, the dragon spoke. "Your people interest me, child. But why have you come here to share these stories with one who will soon be just bones on a mountain?" Sojin's face became serious. "Because, honored Baekho, I do not think your time is over. I think it is just starting." The old dragon raised his head and looked at the small human with new interest. There was something in her voice, a certainty that spoke of hidden knowledge. "Tell me more." "The galaxy has changed, yes," Sojin said as she stood up. "But change does not mean loss. It means becoming something new. You have spent 3,000 years as a guardian, watching over others. But what if there was a different job for you to do?" Before Baekho could answer, Sojin turned on a small device she carried. A picture made of light appeared in the air between them. It showed star maps and flowing information that the dragon had never seen before. The information was complex and would have taken him hours to understand completely. But one thing was clear right away. It was a map of the galaxy's forgotten places. "I am not just a storyteller," Sojin said quietly. "I am someone who finds and saves histories that might be lost forever. I collect the stories of races that no longer exist. I gather records of civilizations that fell before anyone wrote down what they did." The light picture changed. It showed images of dead worlds and empty space stations. It showed old objects floating in the dark space between stars. There are thousands of stories out there, waiting to be found and saved. But I cannot reach them all by myself, and time is running out. Every day another piece of galactic history disappears forever. Bekho stared at the display. His old mind worked to understand what this meant. "You want me to help you?" "I want to offer you something I think you have been missing," Sojin said. "Purpose. The galaxy does not need a guardian anymore, but it badly needs a keeper of stories, someone with the wisdom to understand what should be saved and the experience to know where to look for it." The dragon was quiet for a long time. His great chest moved up and down as he thought about her words. The pain in his bones seemed less now. Just having something to think about besides death had made him feel better. "What makes you think an old dragon has anything left to give?" Sojin smiled again. This time there was something playful in her look. "Because, honored Bekho, you are not just any old dragon. You are the dragon who once talked the Korthak people out of destroying the Ventari homeworld. You argued with their greatest thinker for 3 years until they changed their minds. You are the dragon who stopped the sector wars by yourself. You found out that the land they were fighting over was where the Aquatic Council laid their eggs." The dragon's eyes opened wide. These were not stories that were in any official records. He had thought that only he remembered these things. "How do you know about this?" "Because humans do their homework," Sojin said simply. "We have been studying the older civilizations since we joined the galactic community. We want to learn from those who came before us. Your name shows up in pieces of records scattered across many different files, parts of a bigger story that no one has put together before now." Sojin pointed to the light picture again. "Until now. I have spent the last 5 years tracking down every mention of you I could find, not because I wanted to write your life story, but because I realized something important. You represent something that cannot be replaced. You are a living connection to the galaxy's past. You hold knowledge and experience that cannot be copied or recreated." Bekho felt himself sitting up straighter. His posture improved as old pride stirred within him. It had been so long since anyone had wanted his knowledge instead of just his protection. "You speak of saving records and making archives," he said slowly, "but such work needs travel and investigation. It means going to places that may be dangerous or hard to reach. I am not the creature I once was." Sojin nodded with understanding. "That is why I am not asking you to do this alone. Humanity has resources and technology that could help. We have developed sleep systems that could make long journeys easier for you. We have communication networks that could let you work across many star systems at the same time." She paused, then added quietly, "And we have learned something about making things new again. Not all endings have to be final." The meaning of her words hung in the air between them like a promise. Bekho had lived long enough to know that death was the natural end to any life. But he had also seen wonders that went against natural law. The galaxy was vast and full of possibilities that even his ancient mind could not fully understand. "You would have me become something different," he said. It was not a question but a statement of understanding. "I would have you become what you have always been," Sojin replied. "A guardian, not of territories or trade routes but of memory itself. The stories you could help save, the histories you could help us recover, they would last longer than any empire or any species. They would become part of the foundation that future civilizations build their understanding on." As the second moon of this world rose to join its companion in the star-filled sky, Bekho felt something shift deep inside his mind. The weight of ages that had been pressing down on him began to change into something else. Not burden but responsibility. Not ending but beginning. For the first time in many years, the ancient dragon began to dream of tomorrow instead of yesterday. The change did not happen overnight. Sojin stayed on the mountain world for several weeks. She worked with Bekho to set up the framework for their partnership. She brought more equipment from her shuttle. There were quantum communicators, data storage devices, and most importantly, a new consciousness interface. This would let the dragon's vast memory be properly organized and cross-referenced with existing galactic archives. The beauty of this system, Sojin explained as she set up the neural links, is that it does not replace your natural thought processes. It simply makes them stronger. It lets you access and organize information in ways that would be impossible through biological memory alone. Baek-ho was careful about the technology at first. In his long life, he had seen too many civilizations become dependent on their creations. They lost essential parts of themselves in the process. But as the system came online and he began to experience its capabilities, he realized that Sojin had been careful to preserve his independence. The interface felt like an extension of his own mind, rather than something foreign. Memories that had become fuzzy with age suddenly became crystal clear. Conversations he had shared with long-dead friends became as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. Most remarkably, he found that he could cross-reference his experiences with the vast databases that Sojin had compiled. This created connections and insights that neither could have achieved alone. Remarkable, he murmured as information flowed through his consciousness like water through ancient channels. I can see patterns now that were invisible to me before. The fall of the Caldari Empire was not caused by the plague, as their histories claim. It was the result of a cascade failure in their terraforming systems. This weakened their food production just enough to make the plague devastating instead of merely troublesome. Sojin smiled with satisfaction, and that information could be crucial for preventing similar disasters in the future. The Terraforming Guild has been using modified versions of Caldari technology for the past century. They are completely unaware of its potential vulnerabilities. Together, they began the work of true archaeological investigation, using the resources that Sojin had access to through her position with the Human Archive Foundation. They reached out to contacts across the galaxy. Scientists, historians, treasure hunters, and refugees from dying worlds all became sources of information and potential sites for investigation. Their first major expedition took them to the ruins of Sektar, a gas mining facility that had been abandoned during the Proximity Wars nearly 800 years earlier. The station still drifted in the asteroid field where it had been built. Its massive structure was twisted but intact. Baek-ho, his strength renewed by the life support systems that Sojin had provided, was able to use his natural abilities in ways he had not attempted for decades. His fire breath, carefully controlled, cut through debris that would have taken conventional tools hours to clear. His keen eyesight, enhanced by the neural interface, could spot details in the ancient wreckage that would have been missed by purely technological sensors. But it was their combined perspective that proved most valuable. Where Sojin saw technological artifacts and data storage devices, Baek-ho recognized the cultural significance of their placement and decoration. Where Baek-ho remembered the political circumstances that had led to the station's abandonment, Sojin understood the technical innovations that had made its construction possible. "Look at this," Sojin said, carefully extracting a crystalline storage matrix from what had once been the station's central computer core. "The data structure is completely different from anything in our archives. If we can decode this, it might contain the complete, operational records of a gas harvesting technique that was supposedly lost when Sektar fell." Baek-ho examined the crystal with both his natural senses and the enhanced analytical capabilities of his neural interface. "More than that," he said after a moment. "This crystal contains personal logs as well as operational data. The miners who worked here, their families, their daily lives, all preserved in a format that was designed to last millennia." As they worked to extract and preserve the station's archives, Baek-ho began to understand what Sojin had meant about transformation. He was no longer simply a guardian who protected others through strength and wisdom. He had become something new. He was a bridge between past and future, a living translator who could help the galaxy understand its own history. The work was challenging and often dangerous. It required them to travel to places where few beings had ventured for centuries. But for the first time since his youth, Baek-ho felt truly alive. Each new discovery, each preserved story, each recovered piece of lost knowledge filled him with a sense of purpose that made his great heart beat stronger. Their reputation grew throughout the galactic community. Scientists began to seek their expertise when investigating strange artifacts. Historians consulted them when trying to piece together the complex political relationships of bygone eras. Even government officials started to request their services when dealing with territorial disputes. that hinged on historical precedent. But perhaps most importantly, other species began to approach them with stories of their own. The Veltari, whom Bekho had thought had forgotten him entirely, sent a delegation requesting his help in preserving their oral traditions. The Korthak Collective, recognizing the value of his philosophical insights, asked him to mediate a theological dispute that had been raging for decades. "You have given the galaxy something it did not know it needed," Sojin observed one evening. They sat in the observation deck of their mobile archive ship, watching a binary star system paint the nebula around them in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Bekho, his great form now supported by an elegant harness system that allowed him to remain comfortable during long space voyages, considered her words. "We have given it something," he corrected gently. "This work requires both of us, and the resources that your species has provided." Sojin smiled, but there was a thoughtful expression in her eyes. "About that, I have been wondering something, and I hope you will not take offense at the question. Speak freely, young archivist. After all we have shared, there should be no barriers between us. Why do you think it was a human who found you when you were ready to die? Why not one of the species you had served for millennia?" Bekho was quiet for a long moment. His ancient mind turned over the question. It was something he had wondered about himself, though he had never spoken the thought out loud. "I believe," he said finally, "that it is because your species understands something that the others had forgotten. You know that wisdom is not the same as intelligence. You know that experience cannot be programmed into a computer. You understand that some things are more valuable than their immediate practical uses." He turned his great head to look at her directly. The older races, for all their accomplishments, had become convinced that they could replace everything with technology. They saw my knowledge as outdated information, rather than irreplaceable perspective. But humans still believe in the value of stories. Sojin nodded slowly. "We are a young species. We have not had time to become convinced that we know everything." "Perhaps that is your greatest strength," Bekho replied. "The willingness to learn from those who came before, combined with the energy to do something new with that knowledge." Their conversation was stopped by an alert from the ship's communication system. Sojin activated the display, revealing an urgent message from the Galactic Archaeological Council. The text was brief but alarming. A recently discovered derelict ship had been found to contain technology that was older than all known civilizations. Initial scans suggested it might be from the mythical First Builders, the theoretical race that was believed to have seeded the galaxy with the basic infrastructure that all subsequent civilizations had built upon. "They are requesting our immediate assistance," Sojin said, her voice tight with excitement and concern. "If this is really a First Builder artifact, then it represents the most significant archaeological discovery in galactic history," Bekho finished. "And also potentially the most dangerous. The First Builders were not mythical, young one. I remember the stories that the eldest of my kind used to tell about them." Sojin turned to face him fully. "You know something about the First Builders?" Bekho's expression grew distant, as if he were reaching deep into the most ancient corners of his memory. "Not knowledge, stories. Warnings passed down from dragons so old that I was barely a hatchling when they died. They spoke of the Builders as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what could happen when a species became too powerful, too convinced of their own perfection. What happened to them? No one knows for certain, but the stories suggest that they did not simply disappear. They chose to leave, abandoning the galaxy they had shaped because they realized that their presence was preventing younger species from developing their own paths." Sojin felt a chill run down her spine. "And now we have found one of their ships." "Indeed. Which means that our work is about to become far more important than either of us imagined." Bekho's voice carried the weight of understanding what was coming. "If the First Builders left records behind, if their technology can be understood and preserved, it could change everything. Or it could destroy everything if handled improperly." Without hesitation, Sojin began setting course for the coordinates provided in the message. As their ship turned toward its new destination, both she and Bekho understood that they were about to face the ultimate test of their partnership. The preservation of First Builder knowledge would require all of their combined skills, wisdom, and courage. But there was something else, a deeper significance that neither of them spoke aloud. The discovery of First Builder technology at this moment, just as their own partnership had reached maturity, felt less like coincidence and more like destiny. as if the universe itself had been waiting for the right combination of ancient wisdom and youthful determination to handle such a monumental responsibility. The derelict ship hung in space like a dark jewel against the backdrop of a dying red giant star. It was massive beyond easy understanding, easily the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. No known civilization had ever constructed anything remotely similar. The Archaeological Council survey team is maintaining position at a safe distance, So-Jin reported as their ship approached the designated coordinates. They have detected massive energy signatures within the derelict, but they have not attempted any kind of direct interface. Bekho studied the alien vessel through the ship's enhanced sensors. His ancient eyes tracked details that the instruments might miss. Wise of them. This ship is not dead, merely dormant. I can sense something, awareness perhaps, though not consciousness as we understand it. The Council's expedition leader, a methodical Korthak named Sekra, greeted them via quantum communication as their ship moved into formation with the small fleet that had gathered around the derelict. Honored Bekho Archivist So-Jin, we are grateful for your rapid response. Initial scans have confirmed that this vessel predates all known technological paradigms. More concerning, our attempts to map its interior have been completely unsuccessful. The ship is shielding itself, Bekho observed, his enhanced senses picking up subtle energy patterns that the mechanical sensors could not detect. Not defensively, but selectively. It is choosing what to reveal and when. So-Jin activated her own scanning equipment, cross-referencing the readings with the vast database of ancient technologies that she and Bekho had compiled. There are some similarities to artifacts we have encountered before, but the integration level is far beyond anything we have seen. It is as if the entire ship is a single unified system, rather than a collection of separate components. That would be consistent with First Builder philosophy, Bekho said quietly. According to the stories, they did not build tools. They grew them. Everything they created was, in some sense, alive. The implications of that statement settled over the assembled expedition like a weight. If the ship was truly alive, then their approach would need to be fundamentally different from conventional archaeology. They would not be excavating ruins but conducting a form of first contact. We need to attempt communication, So-Jin said after reviewing all available data, but carefully, respectfully. If this entity has been dormant for millions of years, suddenly awakening it could be traumatic for both sides. Bekho nodded approvingly. Your instincts are sound, but I believe the initial contact should come from me. My kind are old enough to remember the time when all ships were living things. There may be protocols, ways of approaching such entities that have been forgotten by the younger races. With the expedition's consent, Bekho had himself transferred to a specially shielded reconnaissance pod. The dragon's massive form barely fit within the vessel's confines, but the life support systems that So-Jin had designed for him allowed him to function comfortably even in such cramped quarters. As the pod approached the derelict's hull, Bekho began to sing. It was not a sound that any of the other expedition members had ever heard before. It was a deep, resonant melody that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to something deeper than consciousness. The song was ancient beyond measure, a form of communication that dragons had used to speak with the living mountains of their homeworld. The response was immediate and startling. The geometric patterns on the ship's hull began to glow with soft, pulsing light. Sections of the apparently solid surface became transparent, revealing glimpses of vast chambers filled with impossible architectures. Most remarkably, a portion of the hull began to iris open, creating an entrance perfectly sized for Bekho's pod. It is inviting me in, Bekho reported, wonder evident in his ancient voice. The ship recognizes the song. It knows what I am. Are you certain it is safe? So-Jin asked, her concern evident despite her professional excitement. Safety is not the correct concept here, Bekho replied as his pod moved slowly into the ship's interior. But I sense no hostility, no danger in the conventional sense. This entity is curious about me, just as I am curious about it. The interior of the first builder ship defied all conventional understanding of space and architecture. Corridors seemed to extend infinitely in directions that geometry should have made impossible. Walls flowed like liquid while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Most remarkably, The environment seemed to shift and adapt itself to Bekho's needs, adjusting temperature, atmospheric composition, and even apparent gravity to ensure his comfort. "It is not just alive," Bekho reported as he moved deeper into the ship. "It is empathic. It can sense what I need and is actively trying to make me comfortable." The dragon's enhanced senses, augmented by his neural interface, began to detect patterns within the ship's structure. What had seemed like random architectural elements were actually components of a vast data storage and processing system. The ship itself was an archive, a repository of knowledge that spanned geological ages. "So, Jin," Bekho said, his voice filled with awe, "I believe this vessel contains the complete historical records of the first builders. Not just their technology, but their philosophy, their art, their reasons for leaving the galaxy. Everything they learned and experienced over millions of years of existence." The significance of the discovery hit Sojin like a physical blow. The preservation and study of such records would be the work of centuries, possibly millennia. It would revolutionize galactic understanding of history, technology, and the very nature of consciousness itself. But even as excitement filled her, a deeper realization began to form. "Bekho," she said slowly, "I do not think we found this ship by accident. The timing, the location, the fact that it responded to you specifically, this feels planned." The dragon was silent for a moment as he continued his exploration of the ship's interior. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of profound understanding. "You are correct, young archivist. This encounter was planned, though not by us. The ship has been waiting, not just dormant, but actively searching for the right moment to reveal itself." Waiting for what? For someone who could understand its purpose. The first builders did not abandon the galaxy because they were fleeing, or because they had failed. They left because they recognized that their direct presence was limiting the development of younger species. But they also knew that eventually, those species would need guidance to avoid the mistakes that had driven previous civilizations to extinction. As if responding to his words, the ship's interior began to change around Bekho. New passages opened, leading him toward what could only be the vessel's central consciousness core. The chamber he eventually entered was unlike anything in his vast experience. It was a spherical space filled with cascading streams of pure information, knowledge made visible as flowing patterns of light and energy. At the center of it all waited an entity that Bekho recognized despite never having encountered its like before. It was a consciousness so ancient and vast that it made his own 3,000 years of existence seem like a brief moment. Yet it greeted him not as a superior addressing an inferior, but as an equal, acknowledging a kindred spirit. The communication that followed took place on levels that went beyond language or even thought as most beings understood it. Images, emotions, concepts, and pure understanding flowed between the dragon and the first builder entity. In moments that felt like years, Bekho experienced the entire history of a civilization that had achieved heights of knowledge and power that defied imagination. The first builders had indeed seeded the galaxy with the infrastructure that younger races had built upon. But more than that, they had carefully guided the development of cosmic civilization for millions of years. They had subtly nudged species toward cooperation rather than conflict, toward wisdom rather than mere intelligence. Their departure had not been abandonment but graduation. They had recognized that the galaxy had reached a point where direct guidance was no longer necessary or beneficial. The younger races needed to find their own paths, make their own mistakes, and ultimately transcend the limitations that even the first builders had been unable to overcome. But they had also known that there would come a time when a new kind of guidance would be needed. Not the direct intervention they had once provided, but something more subtle. The preservation and sharing of knowledge that would help emerging civilizations avoid the catastrophic mistakes that had destroyed so many others. When the communion ended, Bekho found himself transformed once again. The knowledge he had received was not just information but understanding, not just data but wisdom that integrated seamlessly with his own experience and judgment. "The ship will come with us," he told Sojin as his pod returned to their vessel, "not as our possession but as our partner. The first builder who remains here has chosen to continue the work of guidance but in a new form. Instead of shepherding civilizations from above, it will help us preserve and share the knowledge that those civilizations will need to shepherd themselves." Sojin listened to his report with growing amazement. The implications were staggering, not just for their own work but for the future of galactic civilization itself. "What about the other expedition members?" she asked. "How do we explain this to the Archaeological Council?" Bekho's expression carried a hint of ancient amusement. "We tell them the truth. We have discovered the greatest archaeological find in galactic history, and it requires the most careful and thorough study possible. The fact that the artifact is actively participating in its own investigation will become clear to them in time." As the combined fleet began its journey back towards civilized space, the first builder ship moving alongside them like a willing companion, Sojin reflected on how completely her life had changed. She had set out to save a dying dragon and ended up helping to establish a new form of galactic guidance system. "Do you think we are ready for this responsibility?" she asked Bekho as they watched the stars wheel by. The ancient dragon considered her question with the gravity it deserved. "Readiness is not the correct concept," he said finally, echoing his earlier words about safety. "We will grow into this responsibility, just as we grew into our previous roles. What matters is that we approach it with humility, wisdom, and the understanding that we are not the masters of this knowledge but its custodians." Sojin nodded, then smiled. "Besides, we will not be doing it alone. We have each other, and now we have a partner with millions of years of experience in helping civilizations develop." "Indeed," Bekho replied, his ancient eyes bright with renewed purpose. "And that, I believe, is exactly as it was meant to be." The return journey to the core worlds took several months, time that Sojin and Bekho used to begin the monumental task of cataloging and understanding the first builder archives. Working with the ship's consciousness, which had chosen the name Yunseo for their interactions, they began to develop new methods for preserving and accessing knowledge that transcended traditional archival techniques. The work was unlike anything either of them had experienced before. The first builder records were not simply stored information, but living memories that adapted themselves to the understanding and needs of whoever accessed them. A single record might appear as technical specifications to an engineer, philosophical treatise to a scholar, or cautionary tale to a politician, depending on what that individual needed to learn. "It is not just preservation," Sojin observed as she worked with a particularly complex set of records dealing with environmental management. "It is active education. The archives do not just store knowledge, they teach it." Bekho, who was simultaneously accessing multiple streams of information about interspecies diplomacy, nodded in agreement. "Yunseo has explained this to me. The first builders learned that simply providing information was insufficient. True wisdom comes from understanding not just what happened, but why it happened and how to apply those lessons to new situations." Their arrival at the Central Archives facility on Concordia Station created a sensation throughout the galactic community. Word of the first builder discovery had preceded them, and representatives from dozens of species had gathered to witness the beginning of what many were calling the new age of galactic archaeology. But Sojin and Bekho had learned to be cautious about such grandiose declarations. The work they were undertaking would take generations to complete, and its ultimate impact would depend not on the drama of discovery, but on the patience and wisdom with which the knowledge was shared. The integration of Yunseo into the Galactic Archive Network required the development of entirely new protocols and technologies. The ship's consciousness was too vast and complex to be contained within conventional data storage systems, yet too alien to interface directly with most species' technology without careful mediation. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than trying to download or contain the first builder consciousness, they established a permanent communication link that allowed authorized researchers to access the archives while Yunseo maintained control over what information was shared and when. Think of it as a wise teacher rather than a library, Sojin explained to the assembled representatives of the Galactic Archaeological Council. Yunseo will share knowledge when it determines that the recipients are ready to understand and properly apply what they learn. This approach initially met with resistance from several species who were accustomed to having unlimited access to archived information, but Bekho's testimony about his own experiences with the first builder records gradually convinced even the skeptics that this more cautious approach was necessary. "I have lived for over 3,000 years, the dragon told the assembled council, and I considered myself wise in the ways of the galaxy. Yet there are concepts within these archives that I am still not ready to fully comprehend. The first builders achieved a level of understanding that could be dangerous if misapplied. Their consciousness has agreed to serve as a filter, ensuring that knowledge is shared responsibly. The establishment of what became known as the Living Archive represented a new model for galactic cooperation. Rather than competing for access to the most valuable information, species began to work together to demonstrate their readiness to receive specific types of knowledge. The process encouraged cooperation, careful consideration, and long-term thinking in ways that surprised everyone involved. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sojin and Bekho themselves. Their role evolved from archaeologists and preservationists into something entirely new. They became guides who helped others navigate the vast complexities of accumulated galactic wisdom. The dragon found himself serving as a bridge between the ancient perspectives preserved in the archives and the contemporary needs of galactic civilization. His own experiences provided context that helped younger species understand not just what the archived knowledge contained, but how it related to their current challenges. Sojin, meanwhile, developed into something that had no precedent in galactic history. She became a human who could serve as an interface between multiple forms of consciousness. Her natural empathy and storytelling abilities, combined with the enhanced understanding she had gained through her partnership with both Baiko and Unseo, made her uniquely qualified to help others comprehend knowledge that existed at the intersection of multiple ways of thinking. The work was demanding, but deeply rewarding. Each day brought new challenges as different species approached them with problems that seemed impossible to solve through conventional means. A territorial dispute between silicon-based miners and energy beings required access to geological records spanning millions of years. A philosophical crisis among the collective minds needed resolution through ancient wisdom about the nature of individual versus group consciousness. "Look at this request," Sojin said one morning, reviewing the communications that had arrived overnight. "The Aquatic Council is asking for help understanding why their traditional spawning grounds are failing. They think it might be related to stellar radiation changes, but their historical records only go back 50,000 years. Bekho examined the data through his enhanced neural interface. The answer lies in the deep geological archive from the Sektar expedition. The mining operations in that sector disrupted magnetic field patterns that have been stable for millions of years. The effects are only now reaching the Aquatic Council's territory. Can we fix it? Sojin asked. Not directly, Bekho replied, but we can provide them with the knowledge they need to adapt. The first builder archives contain techniques for magnetic field manipulation that could restore the conditions their species requires. This pattern repeated itself countless times. Problems that seemed new and unique turned out to have historical precedents. Solutions that appeared impossible became achievable when approached with the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of galactic development. The reputation of the Living Archive spread throughout the known galaxy and beyond. Remote civilizations that had never participated in galactic politics began sending delegations. Isolated species that had been considered extinct were discovered to be thriving in hidden enclaves, drawn out of isolation by the promise of preserved knowledge from their ancestors. One of the most remarkable discoveries came from the edge of explored space. A distress signal led Sojin and Bekho to a dying world where the last members of the ancient Veltari civilization were struggling to survive. These were not the same bird people who had once brought Bekho gifts, but their distant cousins who had fled during a great civil war thousands of years earlier. Honored Ancient, the eldest of the Veltari said when she met Bekho, "We have preserved the old songs, the ones that speak of dragons who watched over the galaxy. We never thought we would see one again, and I never thought I would hear those songs again," Bekho replied, deeply moved by the encounter. "But perhaps that is why we were brought together. Your people's oral traditions contain information that was lost in the main archives. Combined with what we have preserved, we can piece together a complete picture of your civilization's golden age." The integration of Veltari oral history with archived records produced insights that neither could have provided alone. Their songs contain not just historical information, but practical knowledge about stellar navigation, atmospheric engineering, and biological adaptation that had been preserved in poetic form for millennia. This is how knowledge truly survives, Sojin observed as she worked with the Veltari singers to translate their ancient songs into forms that could be preserved in the living archive. Not just in databases and storage devices, but in the hearts and minds of those who keep the stories alive. The success with the Veltari led to the establishment of the Oral Tradition Preservation Project. Teams of linguists, historians, and cultural specialists traveled throughout the galaxy, seeking out isolated communities and forgotten colonies where ancient knowledge might have been preserved in non-technological forms. Each discovery added new layers to the living archive's understanding of galactic history. Cave paintings on remote worlds revealed star charts that predated known civilization. Folk tales told around campfires contained warnings about cosmic phenomena that modern science was only beginning to understand. Children's games passed down through generations preserved mathematical principles that had been thought lost forever. We are not just preserving the past, Bako observed during one of their regular planning sessions. We are discovering that the past has been preserving itself, waiting for us to recognize its value. The work expanded beyond mere preservation. As the living archive grew, it became apparent that patterns were emerging from the accumulated data. Civilizations rose and fell in predictable cycles. Technological development followed similar paths across different species. Even consciousness itself seemed to evolve according to certain universal principles. Look at this, Sojin said, displaying a complex analysis that Yunseo had generated. There are mathematical relationships between stellar formation, planetary development, and the emergence of intelligent life. The first builders knew this, but they never shared the full implications. Bako studied the data with growing excitement, because they understood that each species needed to discover these principles for themselves, in their own time and in their own way. But now that we have reached a certain level of galactic maturity, we can begin to see the larger patterns. The implications were staggering. If consciousness evolved according to universal principles, then it might be possible to predict and guide that evolution in positive directions. The living archive could become more than a repository of past knowledge. It could become a tool for actively shaping the future development of galactic civilization, but this realization also brought new responsibilities. The power to influence the evolution of consciousness was not something to be wielded lightly. Every decision about what knowledge to share and when to share it could have consequences that lasted for geological ages. We need to be very careful, Sojin said as they contemplated the weight of their growing responsibilities. The first builders withdrew from direct involvement because they recognized that too much guidance could be as harmful as too little. Indeed, Bako agreed. But perhaps that is why the universe brought us together. Your species' youth and energy, combined with my experience and caution, may provide the balance that is needed. Their partnership had evolved far beyond its original scope. What had begun as a simple effort to preserve historical records had become a form of cosmic gardening, carefully nurturing the conditions that would allow consciousness to flourish throughout the galaxy. The living archive continued to grow, not just in size, but in sophistication. New connections were discovered daily. Ancient mysteries were solved, only to reveal deeper mysteries that required further investigation. The work seemed infinite in scope, but that only made it more compelling. Do you think we will ever complete this task? Sojin asked one evening as they watched the data streams flowing through the archive's central processing chamber. Bako considered the question with the perspective of his enhanced consciousness. Completion is not the goal, he said finally. The work itself is the purpose. Each generation will add to what we have built, and each will discover new meanings in the knowledge we have preserved. So our job is to begin something that others will continue? Our job is to ensure that the chain of knowledge is never broken, Bako replied. That wisdom accumulated over millions of years is not lost to entropy or conflict. That future civilizations have access to the insights they need to avoid the mistakes of the past and to reach for possibilities we cannot yet imagine. As they spoke, new alerts began appearing on their monitoring systems. Signals were coming from regions of space that had been thought empty. Deep space observation stations were detecting massive structures moving in the void between galaxies. Most intriguingly, some of these signals were using communication protocols that predated even the first builders. It seems, Sojin said with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, that our work is about to enter a new phase. Bekho's ancient eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. Then we had better prepare ourselves. If there are consciousnesses even, years passed and the living archive became the foundation for a new era of galactic development. Conflicts that had seemed impossible to solve were resolved through access to historical precedents and philosophical frameworks preserved from civilizations that had faced similar challenges. Technologies that had been stuck for centuries suddenly leaped forward as researchers gained access to first builder insights about the fundamental nature of matter and energy. But the most profound changes were cultural rather than technological. The knowledge that the galaxy had been guided and protected by wise predecessors created a sense of continuity and purpose that had been missing for millennia. Species began to see themselves not as isolated civilizations struggling for individual advantage, but as participants in an ongoing story of cosmic development. "We are not the first to face these challenges," became a common phrase among galactic leaders, and we will not be the last. Our responsibility is to learn from those who came before and to preserve wisdom for those who will come after. The success of the living archive also led to the establishment of similar projects throughout the galaxy. Other ancient sites were approached with new reverence and understanding. Dormant consciousnesses were awakened and integrated into the growing network of preserved wisdom. The galaxy began to remember itself in ways that had been impossible for millions of years. Sojin often reflected on the irony of her situation. She had begun her career as a simple archivist, concerned primarily with preventing the loss of historical information. Now she found herself at the center of a galactic renaissance, helping to facilitate the kind of cultural and intellectual growth that occurred perhaps once in a cosmic age. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found you on that mountain?" she asked Bekho one evening as they worked together in the vast chamber that housed their portion of the living archive. The dragon, his great form now supported by elegant technological frameworks that allowed him to work for extended periods without fatigue, considered her question with the deliberation that had become characteristic of his enhanced thought processes. "I have wondered," he admitted, "but I believe the outcome would have been the same eventually. Yunseo has told me that the first builder ship would have continued searching until it found individuals capable of fulfilling this role. If not us, then others with the necessary combination of wisdom, curiosity, and dedication. But it was us," Sojin pointed out, "and I cannot help but think that matters." Bekho's ancient eyes focused on her with warm affection. "It matters greatly, young friend, not because we were destined for this role, but because we chose to embrace it. The universe provides opportunities, but it is up to individuals to recognize and seize them." Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Yunseo. The first builder consciousness had detected something that required their immediate attention. It was a signal from the edge of the galaxy, transmitted on frequencies that had not been used for millions of years. "It appears," Yunseo's synthesized voice filled the chamber, "that the first builders were not the only ancient civilization to employ the strategy of guided withdrawal. We have received what can only be described as a greeting from entities that predate even our own existence." Sojin felt her heart rate increase as the implications became clear. If there were consciousnesses even older than the first builders, entities that had guided the development of the galaxy from even more remote eras, then their understanding of cosmic history was still incomplete. "The second builders?" she asked, using the term that xenoarchaeologists had coined for the theoretical civilization that might have guided the first builders themselves. "Something far more ancient than that," Yunseo replied. "The signal contains references to events that occurred when the galaxy was still forming, when the first stars were condensing from primordial gas clouds. We may be about to make contact with the original gardeners of cosmic consciousness." Bekho straightened, his enhanced senses already detecting the subtle changes in local spacetime that indicated the approach of something vast and unimaginably powerful. "Are we prepared for such contact?" "I believe," Yunseo said with something that might have been anticipation, "that this is what we have been preparing for all along. The preservation of knowledge, the development of wisdom, the establishment of cooperation between different forms of consciousness, all of it has been leading to this moment." As alerts began sounding throughout the archive facility, as representatives from across the galaxy began converging on their location, Sojin realized that their greatest adventure was just beginning. The work they had done to preserve the past had prepared them to help shape the future in ways that none of them had imagined possible. The massive structures that emerged from the galactic edge defied all previous understanding of engineering and physics. They were not ships in any conventional sense, but rather mobile habitats the size of star systems, containing entire ecosystems within their crystalline frameworks. The beings who contacted them spoke in harmonics that resonated through dimensions beyond the normal three of space. These were the primordial gardeners, the original architects of cosmic evolution. They had been present when the universe was young, guiding the formation of the first galaxies and nurturing the earliest forms of consciousness. Their withdrawal had not been recent but had occurred billions of years ago, when they judged that the cosmos had developed sufficient complexity to continue evolving without their direct intervention. But now they returned, drawn by the successful integration of the First Builder archives and the emergence of a truly cooperative galactic civilization. They came not to reclaim their role as guides, but to offer a graduation gift to their cosmic children. The knowledge they shared made even the First Builder archives seem limited by comparison. These were the fundamental principles of reality itself, the deep structures that govern not just matter and energy, but consciousness and time. With this wisdom, galactic civilization would be able to transcend the physical limitations of the universe and explore realms of existence that had previously been purely theoretical. But the gardeners made clear that such knowledge came with ultimate responsibility. The species that received it would become the new shepherds of cosmic development, responsible not just for their own galaxy but for nurturing the emergence of consciousness throughout the observable universe. The cycle continues. The lead gardener communicated in harmonics that bypassed language entirely. As we once guided you, you will guide others. The universe grows in wisdom through the accumulated experience of all who dwell within it. So Jin and Baekho found themselves at the center of this cosmic transition. Their partnership, born from a chance meeting between a dying dragon and a curious human, had become the template for a new form of cosmic governance, based on cooperation between different forms of consciousness. We started with stories, Sojin observed as they watched the gardeners prepare for their final departure into dimensions beyond normal space-time. And stories are what we leave behind. Baekho nodded, his ancient wisdom now enhanced by cosmic understanding that spanned geological ages. But now our stories will help shape the development of consciousness itself. Every choice we make, every piece of wisdom we preserve will influence the growth of intelligence throughout the universe. The old dragon who had once thought his time was over had indeed been transformed, not into something different from what he had always been, but into the fullest expression of his essential nature. He remained a guardian, but his protection now extended across cosmic scales. He remained a keeper of wisdom, but the knowledge he preserved would guide the development of civilizations yet to be born. And at his side, the young human archivist who had saved him from despair had grown into something equally remarkable. Sojin had become a bridge between forms of consciousness so different that they might never have understood each other without her mediation. Her gift for storytelling had evolved into the ability to help entire species understand their place in the cosmic narrative. Together, they watched as the primordial gardeners faded from normal space-time, leaving behind only the gentle resonance of their final blessing. The universe was now truly in the hands of its younger children, guided by the accumulated wisdom of all who had come before. What comes next? Sojin asked as they turned their attention to the vast work that lay ahead. Baekho's response carried the warmth of deep friendship and the confidence of eternal purpose. We continue the story, dear friend. We help others find their own paths to wisdom, and we ensure that no knowledge is lost that might help future generations avoid the mistakes of the past. The living archive hummed around them, no longer just a repository of galactic history, but a living system for nurturing cosmic consciousness. Through their partnership, an ancient dragon and a young human had become the foundation for a new form of universal guidance, one based not on power or control, but on the simple act of sharing stories that help others understand their place in the infinite cosmos. The old dragon had not faded away after all. Instead, he had been reborn as something greater than he had ever imagined possible. And it had all begun with a human girl who believed in the power of stories to change the